making a bomb even after President Trump announced withdrawing from the Iran deal. Clearly, the president didn't like that because in his tweets earlier today, he said that Iran is still very much a source of potential conflict and danger. And then, of course, there is North Korea. You heard the intel officials say that they have taken steps at odds with denuclearization. You've heard this administration, though, the president specifically expressed more confidence that North Korea is no longer a threat in terms of nuclear weapons, that they haven't tested anything, which is true. However, it is clear from the intel officials that they want to maintain their stockpile as a source of survival. The president also knocking his intel chiefs in a series of tweets about that, saying that the relationship has greatly improved. And then, of course, there is ISIS, Brianna, the president tweeting about that, saying that the caliphate will soon be destroyed. Contrast that with what his intel chiefs said yesterday, that there are thousands of fighters in Syria and Iraq that still want to do harm to the United States. So it's really striking to see the contrast and how the president is handling this in a series of tweets. Of course, Brianna, it is not the first time that President Trump has gone after intelligence officials, most famously when it comes to Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Brianna?
Yes, which they say happened very clearly. Pamela Brown at the White House, thank you. Meanwhile, negotiations are underway on Capitol Hill right now as lawmakers try to avoid yet another shutdown. As it stands, it's really unclear exactly what President Trump is going to accept in terms of a deal, but he did offer this on Twitter this morning. If the committee of Republicans and Democrats now meeting on border security is not discussing or contemplating a wall or physical barrier, they are wasting their time. We have CNN political analyst and Politico congressional reporter Rachel Bade with us live from Capitol Hill. And Rachel, we're just 16 days away until part of the government, the big part that was just shut down, runs out of funding yet again. So based on this tweet, it really sounds like we're kind of at square one here. No wall, no government funding. Is the wall on the table, at least for some of the Democrats in these negotiations?
You know, Democrats have really softened their rhetoric when it comes to the wall. They're not saying right now that it's immoral. We haven't heard Pelosi use that word in a couple of days. But make no mistake here, Democrats are not feeling any pressure right now to give the president this $5 billion worth of wall money, and they're very unlikely to do so. In fact, I would say point blank, they're not going to. Look, this committee that is meeting today to try to avert another government shutdown, they could very well come to a deal, but it's not a deal the president is going to like, and it's going to be much more narrow from what I hear from both parties. You know, the president said when he reopened the government, Brianna, that he wanted both sides to work on some sort of deal that would address the situation of Dreamers and give him this $5 billion in border wall money. But Democrats are saying they don't want to address DACA and the Dreamers situation at all right now, and if they don't get that, then they're not going to give very much on the border wall, if anything.
No, that's a very good point. They would want something huge for that if they even go for it, which they've been reticent to do. And at the same time, Rachel, you're covering this. Lawmakers are working on ways to prevent another shutdown from happening.
That's right. And I think a very narrow deal is possible. You have appropriators in one room. Appropriators have sort of a reputation for, compromising and trying to come to the middle. But we're talking here maybe a couple $100 million for border wall reconstruction, maybe a tiny bit of new wall, not $5 billion. And this is going to put the president in a pickle, right? He has said he was hoping these 3 weeks would, pressure lawmakers into coming up with some sort of deal. But the reality is, on Capitol Hill, there is no appetite for another shutdown. And so that takes that emphasis off the table and that sort of edge, that cliff off the table, because Republicans, they don't want to do this. And they're going to tell the president no if he tries to go for another shutdown. It could lead potentially to an emergency declaration by the president. And we are hearing from Republicans up here that he is very much considering that and leaning toward it. And that's what we might see happen on February 15th.
Wow, we will wait and see. And legal challenges to follow, no doubt, if he does do that. Rachel Bade on the Hill for us. Thank you. President Trump spoke directly with Venezuela's opposition leader and self-declared acting President Juan Guaido for the first time today to offer continued support from the White House and also to reinforce Washington's position that Guaido is the country's rightful leader. In the meantime, Guaido's supporters are taking to the streets again today to protest against dictator Nicolas Maduro. President Trump tweeted that Maduro is ready to negotiate after the U.S. placed new sanctions on Venezuela. But Guaido says he's not interested in negotiating on Maduro's terms. CNN's Nick Payton Walsh is in nearby Colombia. And Nick, Guaido is banned from traveling. His bank accounts have been frozen by the Supreme Court. What is next, and what effect is this U.S. position having on the internal politics in Venezuela?
Brianna, I think it's important to kind of recognize there are sort of two different realities here. There's the one which Washington is speaking of, along with the opposition to the Maduro government, about how Juan Guaido is the interim president. He's self-declared, remember. He swore himself in front of a protest crowd, saying that much legislation in Venezuela recognizes him as a legitimate option. What they're saying and the actions they're doing to make sure that they can get hold of some of the sanctioned and frozen bank accounts of the Venezuelan government that the US wants to give the money from to the opposition. There's that discussion happening outside and all the international recognition of Juan Guaido, and there's what's happening inside Venezuela itself, where Juan Guaido is, but his bank accounts are frozen and he can't travel out of the country. He also really can't get his hands on the millions, if not possibly billions, the US would like to see him get hold of to put humanitarian aid into practice. That's a complicated task, and it's key though, because you're hearing and seeing now protests inside the country on the streets today. They weren't that big, they weren't as big as the ones last week that saw him swear himself in, and they possibly will give those around Maduro who are wondering how this is going to develop, particularly the military and the elite, pause to think, actually, let's see how the weekend's protests play out. It's all about the money, really. When that runs out, Nicolas Maduro's in peril, the US moving fast to strip that down and make petrol perhaps harder to come by in the country. But we're going to have to see how this weekend's protests play out, really. Today, what we've seen so far, I don't think is going to move the dial a lot. Brianna?
All right, very interesting. Nick Payton Walsh in Colombia. We appreciate that report. A CNN political commentator and host of Smerconish here on CNN, Michael Smerconish, with us now. I want to talk to you, Michael, first about one of the big stories we're covering today, which is that the president has been questioning really the intelligence of his intelligence officials, which it isn't exactly new, right? He doesn't believe them about Russian meddling in the 2016 election. He does say publicly that U.S. intelligence is naive. It needs to, quote, as he put it today, go back to school. What do you think about this?
Well, I think you're right that the seeds were sown in the Russian imbroglio when he didn't buy into that intelligence, arguably because it suits his interests not to. That's probably where the base of this lies. But I think we've been awfully lucky so far. This is awfully dangerous stuff. What would we do in the case of a national emergency where the president is telling us one thing and the intelligence sources are telling us something else? Because it used to be that these political differences, they ended at the water's edge, and we would unite as Americans against a common foe. I worry, you were just talking, for example, about Venezuela. What if the president wants to do something in Venezuela that's not justified by the intel, according to our intel chiefs? So hopefully they get on the same page soon. Otherwise, I think it could lead to something really perilous.
I want to ask you about something that's playing out right now between billionaires and some Democratic lawmakers who want Medicare for all. Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Bernie Sanders, they support Medicare for all. Michael Bloomberg and former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz do not. Both are considering a run for president, as you know. What do you make of these potential billionaire candidates going head-to-head with Democrats on this issue?
I like the influence, because without them there, you'd have politicians saying, here's what we should do, and perhaps not enough explanation as to how you pay for it. So in this case, I mean, you could say what you will about both Bloomberg and Howard Schultz, but they know how to read a ledger. They know how to build a business. And I personally like someone saying, OK, this sounds terrific, but how are we going to make it happen?
What do you think about all of this opposition to Howard Schultz? I've heard party Democrats, even in Washington state, we had one on this week saying, look, this isn't someone who's ever even really shown an interest in the party or trying to do something on other levels. He's just all of a sudden trying to throw his hat into the ring in the presidential race. What do you make of just he's created such a backlash? What do you make of it?
I'm dumbfounded by it. Here's a guy who tweets and then says, I love America and I want to run for president, I think, as a centrist independent. Why aren't we thanking him? Why aren't we saying, wow, the fact that you would undertake a challenge like that and throw your hat in the ring, we don't know if we're for or against you, but I salute anybody, as Theodore Roosevelt said, who is willing to get in the arena. Here's a guy with a legitimate Horatio Alger story. He's a legitimate billionaire. I don't know if we can say that about the others who are self-professed. He's got some interesting ideas and a plurality of Americans. This is the most important part. Self-identify the way that he has described himself. I need to repeat and remind folks that more individuals eligible to vote in 2016 sat it out than voted for Donald Trump or for Hillary Clinton. So before you tell me all this spoiler business, take up the beef with those who didn't get off their butt and get out and vote in the last cycle.
Well, those are fighting words, Michael Smerconish. and you can
listen,
get
Brianna, I should say, I don't know Howard Schultz. I've not interviewed Howard Schultz. I'm not here to carry his water, but I'm really appalled by the blowback against someone willing to put some skin in the game and try and make the situation better.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and Michael, I know that you'll be talking about this and many other things on Saturday on your show, Smerconish, which we will definitely tune in for. That will be 9 a.m. on Saturday here on CNN.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
Senator Kamala Harris already bending on her vow to eliminate private insurance just 24 hours after backing Medicare for all. Plus, Chris Christie's fascinating story about watching the Access Hollywood tape with President Trump before the story broke. And the secret Vladimir Putin chats. We're now learning who was not in the room when he met with President Trump. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris is sticking by her support of Medicare for all, but she does say that she's flexible on whether to eliminate private insurance to achieve that goal, as she advocated during a CNN town hall on Monday night. Now, Harris says that she's open to more moderate plans to achieve the goal of health care for everyone. We have Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a Democrat from Florida, former chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, with us. Congresswoman, it's so great to have you here. And as you're seeing so many of these candidates from your party talking about Medicare for all, it's a position that was really popularized by Bernie Sanders in the last cycle. They're making these promises, but watching Senator Harris and her campaign now broadening out her openness to health care reform that doesn't necessarily eliminate private insurance companies, do you worry that this is a sign that Democrats might be opening themselves up to some really big promises that they can't realistically keep?
No, on the contrary. I think you'll see, number one, we'll have a historic number of candidates who will compete for the Democratic nomination to get rid of, the most erratic prevaricator that we've ever had in the White House. And you'll see each and every one of them be for this litmus test. And that is that every one of them will be for making sure that we can expand access to quality, affordable health care to as many people as we can. Everyone, if that's possible. And you'll see, I think, different candidates take the position that there are multiple pathways to getting there, and that we need to do that as soon as and as comprehensively as possible. And you'll also see, equally as importantly, them defend the Affordable Care Act and the 20 million plus individuals in America who have quality, affordable health care now that didn't before, and prevent Donald Trump from taking that away from them.
Promising access to more affordable health care is one thing. Promising Medicare for all and promising to get rid of private insurers, which so much of the system is currently based on, is another thing. Are they over-promising by talking about a change that is that large, that seems very difficult to achieve?
See, I think we have to look past the surface level name for it. The moniker of what you call the concept, which we are all fully embracing, is that healthcare is a right and should not be treated as a privilege that is only available to those who can afford it. That is what Democrats are for. That's what you'll see every Democratic presidential candidate be for. And like you would expect, they will take different approaches to getting there. But, the black and white choice of are you or are you not for Medicare for all, we are all for, and that's the litmus test that there should be, that I think every one of them will meet. We are all for making sure that everyone in America can get access to quality, affordable health care, and we need to all move forward together to ensure that that happens.
I want to talk to you about Howard Schultz. As you know, he's contemplating a run for the presidency as an independent. He's gotten so much backlash from people in your party. And I was just talking to Michael Smerconish. Admittedly, he's to the right of you. But he said he doesn't understand why someone who has such a good story from, growing up in low-income housing and becoming a legitimate billionaire, and now he's talking about throwing his hat into the arena, why he is getting so much blowback.
Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We've watched this movie before. In 2000, when Ralph Nader won, he got 92,000 votes in the state of Florida. And that election came down to 537 votes in my state because Ralph Nader, a variety of other reasons too, but essentially if Ralph Nader hadn't run, Al Gore would have been president. So as much respect as some of us might have for Howard Schultz and his accomplishments, and he's been a good Democrat for many years, for him to suggest that the Democratic Party is far too left for him and he needs to, shake some sense into us and run for president as an independent really shows that he doesn't quite grasp the depth of the impact that decision would have on our ability to defeat Donald Trump. It would be incredibly damaging.
The Democratic Party apparatus, it really coalesced around Hillary Clinton last time. You saw people who were very much a part of the establishment sort of waiting in the wings for her campaign. And then we saw you yourself, you were accused and hacked emails that were obtained by Russia, which were then released, showed with good reason that had occurred, that you and the DNC had been favoring Hillary Clinton, certainly in the end of the primary race, even if at the very least it was trying to speed up a foregone conclusion for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders looked at that. He said, the system is rigged. And he was saying that even before that happened. I wonder if you think maybe that's part of the reason why candidates like Howard Schultz look at this and they say, I don't really want to be a part of that system. That doesn't seem like something that I can participate in and that will be fair to me.
Oh, on the contrary. I mean, Brianna, we're about to have a record number of candidates decide to run for our party's nomination. And I am absolutely confident, as are Democrats all across this country, that we will put forward, and our process will allow us to put forward the best nominee that we can put up to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, who is destroying this country, who is ignoring the rule of law, who is lying, and who has brought the country to its knees through a irresponsible government shutdown and may do so again. We have a lot at stake, and Democrats understand that. And I think you'll find a Democratic Party at the end of the primary nominating contest that has never been more unified behind our eventual nominee.
You were the head of the DNC when it did become apparent in May of 2016 that the DNC had been hacked. It was about a month later where you had a company come in and take a look at really what did that mean, who had done it, and they determined that it was Russian hackers, and that was out there publicly that's who is responsible for this. So when you have read this indictment of Roger Stone where it alleges that he was seeking emails damaging to Hillary Clinton, even after WikiLeaks dumped those DNC emails that were publicly known to have been obtained by the Russians, what do you make
stolen.
of...
Let's call it what it is.
Yeah, let's say stolen. Yeah, hacked and stolen and then published. What do you make of people around the president saying, people like Roger Stone, these are just process crimes, they're lying, this isn't collusion? What do you make of that?
What I make of it is that Roger Stone and all of the other indicted likely criminals that Robert Mueller has accused of wrongdoing are doing what folks in that category do. They are trying to save their own skin, save the president's skin. We're talking about a situation here where Roger Stone absolutely knew that Russia had stolen information from the DNC, and he was a part of a scheme to coordinating with a senior Trump campaign official directed by someone higher than that to get access to that stolen information that was stolen by Vladimir Putin and use it to help elect Donald Trump president of the United States. And they are going to do everything they can, Roger Stone in particular, to lie, cheat, and prevent us from getting justice and making sure that the most important thing occurs, and that is that they are brought to justice and that this never happens again in the United States of America, that no foreign enemy state can be allowed to interfere with our elections. That's what this is all about. And I'm on the Oversight Committee, Brianna, now, and I'm going to be working with Chairman Cummings and my colleagues to both help get to the bottom of how this all happened so we can take steps to prevent it from ever happening again.
All right, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, it was an infamous moment from the 2016 campaign, and now Chris Christie is revealing what it was like to watch the Access Hollywood tape for the first time while Donald Trump was there in the room watching it with him. Plus, the president touted a groundbreaking in Wisconsin as evidence that manufacturing jobs were coming back to the U.S., but today, the company may be reversing course. Former New Jersey governor and Trump transition team chairman Chris Christie is taking us behind the scenes of the Trump campaign, specifically to that fateful day in October of 2016 when the now infamous Access Hollywood tape was released. On the tape, Trump brags about sexually assaulting women. And here's how Christie describes watching that tape with Trump in the very same room. Quote, "The tape was hard to watch. It was harder to listen to. But we watched and listened to the Access Hollywood video all the way to the end. The words sounded crude and vulgar playing through the small speaker on Hope Hicks's laptop, even more so with Donald sitting there with us." He goes on, "People started proposing phrases to quote Trump as saying many years ago. Bill Clinton has said far worse to me on the golf course. I apologize if anyone was offended." Christie also reveals that it was Trump himself that actually came up with that excuse, that his words were just locker room talk. Gloria Borger, David Gregory here with us now to talk about this. It's such an interesting fly-on-the-wall moment in this book. What does this scene reveal to you?
I remember the night that this occurred, and I remember watching that video, and Chris Christie's absolutely right. It did look like a hostage video. What his story tells me is that Trump was in charge, that people were saying to Trump, there were questions about whether you should say if anyone was offended, you should stop talking about the Clintons in this. This is not about the Clintons, as Christie advised him. You know, he said, I like the apology. I don't like the Clinton part. He said that to someone over the phone. And in the end, they went with this horrible statement, that Donald Trump...
The videotape
wanted. Yeah, the videotape one. And the next day, as you know, Reince Priebus said... everyone's saying you need to withdraw.
But this is what's interesting is you get this window into new math and old math, right? The old math was you're done. You can't talk like that. You're finished. We're debating whether or not if someone was offended. Of course they're offended. Anybody would be offended. And Trump had this sense of two things. One, always bring up the Clintons because that seems to work pretty well. And by the way, Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, used that pretty well too in his own defense. So that going to the Clinton playbook. And then the other piece of it was, no, this is how we navigate around that. And so there's Reince Priebus the next day who's out on an island saying, like, you got to withdraw or else you're going to kill the whole Republican Party. And there's enough people who were doing the new math around Trump, kind of influenced by Trump, who said, no, actually, this guy could probably walk on this.
And remember, Christie also says, and this tells you something else about Donald Trump, that he came up with the phrase, locker room talk. It was just locker room talk. And
which
that turned
everyone repeated.
Exactly.
Supporters, Ben Carson, any surrogate. It was
my
over
kids
and over.
use that now.
So Trump...
Are you serious? Oh, Lord.
No, not serious.
Like a joke?
Trump was, Trump was his own spokesman in this and coined this phrase, which they used to some success.
So he writes in his book about, well, really a lot of things, and he's been doing a lot of interviews to promote it. So he does not paint a pretty picture of Jared Kushner, whose father, Christie, once successfully prosecuted. Let's listen.
Would you separate your experience if your father had been put in jail from the prosecutor who put him in jail?
If my father was guilty, I would. Mr. Kushner pled guilty. He admitted the crimes. And so what am I supposed to do as a prosecutor? I mean, if a guy hires a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law and videotapes it and then sends the videotape to his sister to attempt to intimidate her from testifying before a grand jury, do I really need any more justification than that? I mean, it's one of the most loathsome, disgusting crimes that I prosecuted when I was U.S. attorney.
That was a little added something.
And he, you know what's it? He over and over.
Yeah.
He seems, there seems to be this theme where he never paints a pretty picture of Jared Kushner.
Right.
He's reinforcing over and over on this book tour that Jared Kushner is extremely influential, but that he makes bad decisions, in Chris Christie's opinion. And also that he feels clearly that Kushner has kept him, Chris Christie, the one with the good judgments, away from Donald Trump because of this personal beef.
But the thing we have to focus on about Kushner's father, look, it's his father. He loves him. Obviously, he's going to have a reaction to what happened to him. But let's just put that aside for a second and be more dispassionate about it. His father pled to those counts. Why? I know, I'm pretty close to this whole, not this case, but the legal system in general. It's because if he had gone to trial, it could have been worse for him. That's why he pled. Okay? So this pity party for his father, sorry. I mean, he was the U.S. attorney. He's damn right. He ought to stand up and say why he pursued that and that it was a tough charges.
And Christie believes, of course, that Jared had a lot to do with his being fired as the head of the transition. And Christie believes that's the original sin of the Trump administration, that if they had gone through all of his suggestions and his loose leaf binders and everything else, instead of dumping them in the trash, that they would have had a government in waiting that was ready to operate. Instead, he got kicked out, and he believes that's where it all started going bad. And I believe he's probably right.
He's probably right, although, the idea that
everything
he alone
would be
was
fine. I know.
Right,
it would
that
all
he
be
is the steward of that. He alone could have fixed it. He would have been the great steward. But I think there's obviously truth in that. What's interesting is that he's settling some scores here in this book, more than I thought he might.
But it is interesting, and his interviews are even more so. You guys stick around for me. We have a quick programming note. Chris Christie is going to join Chris Cuomo tonight on CNN. That's going to be an interesting interview, so tune in. Watch Cuomo Primetime at 9 p.m. Eastern. And coming up, Republican Senator Susan Collins announcing that she's not ready to get on the Trump train for 2020 quite yet. And is the...
This is CNN Breaking News.
A multi-billion-dollar project touted by President Trump may miss the mark on the president's promise of bringing manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. Foxconn was lured to Wisconsin with expensive incentives and platitudes from the president.
This is a great day for American workers and manufacturing, and for everyone who believes in the concept and the label made in the USA. The company's initial investment of more than $10 billion will create 3,000 jobs at a minimum, with the potential for up to 13,000 jobs in the very near future. The construction of this facility represents the return of LCD, electronics, and electronic manufacturing to the United States, the country that we love.
Well, now that company that got really the red carpet treatment there from President Trump may drop plans to rebuild flat screens there because they can get them cheaper overseas. So instead of the thousands of promised manufacturing jobs, they'll add engineers and researchers instead. We have Gloria and David back with us now. Gloria, how damaging is this to the president and his promises?
Well, it's very damaging. I mean, the tape shows it on. He got a promise. They got a better deal. And they decided to go with it. And, this is one of the things that President Trump was touting during the campaign and during his presidency, which is that all kinds of manufacturing businesses are going to come back to America and create jobs. And we've seen over and over again that when they don't believe they can do it, they're not going to. Look at Harley Davidson. It's hurt Harley Davidson because they refused, but it's a problem for him.
Look, they're doing it because it's the most efficient way to do business, right? And so they feel this point about shareholder value, which is in conflict with a lot of politics on the right and the left, of populist politics saying, well, there's a greater mission here to workers, to U.S. workers, and let's not forget the politics. This is Wisconsin, a state that the president won. This is Paul Ryan, former House Speaker. This is Scott Walker, former Republican governor. There were all kinds of tax incentives. Democrats said that this is a giveaway. But this is the test of the proposition that President Trump says, look, globalization's bad. It's hurting too many people. I'm going to turn it around. And he hasn't been able to do that. Now, is he going to threaten them? Is he going to take some sort of action? What's the remedy to opposing globalization and protecting the American worker? I mean, where is he actually doing it? And where is he going to be able to say, I was able to reverse this tide of businesses doing things the most efficient way for their business?
Well, and Trump is a businessman. And he understands the businesses are going to do what's best for them.
Right.
And they're not going to do what's best for him. And so how can he then come out and say, well, he'll tweet about it or something
He'll do what's
else,
best for him.
that he was
Sure.
betrayed, et cetera, and they should be ashamed
But he
of
would
themselves.
make an argument that it's not for him. It's for really
American
benefiting the
worker. That's
American
right.
worker.
Right.
But this is the point about protectionism. Is that going to prevail against the way to efficiently do business? As you talk about the supply chain, manufacturing them in China, finishing them off in Mexico, and importing them, doesn't mean there can't be research jobs here, but that's fundamentally the tension.
Let's talk about 2020 because it's easy. Okay, it's easy to talk a whole lot about Democrats. I mean, there's like so many of them hopping into the race, but we should also ask, how do Republicans feel about their candidate? Okay, so let's listen to Maine Senator Susan Collins getting that question.
Are you at this point prepared to endorse President Trump?
I'm really focused on my own campaign for 2020, and I really haven't focused on the presidential campaign. So I'm not prepared at this point to make that decision. I'm going to have to see what happens between now and then and look at what his record is.
Look at his record.
Do you know what that means? It means she's waiting for a challenger, and she's going to see what she can do.
Because she knows what his record is.
She knows
guys.
what his record is. And by the way, she came out and supported him on Kavanaugh.
Yeah, that's
she
big.
was there,
Right.
and that was big.
Right.
And he complimented her, but on lots of other things, she has not supported him. So, she's waiting to see how it gels. It's not any secret she doesn't love the guy.
Right.
So
she's also,
it's not a
she's
surprise.
also in Maine. She wants to see how weak he gets and how much separation she needs from him versus what the downside is to not being with him. I think there's a fair amount of Republicans who are in this position. They're not ready to totally jump off the ship yet, but he's getting weak enough to where they think, we can create a little separation here and help ourselves.
Well, with 39, what is his approval down to? 39%? That's not exactly a strong
That's like
position.
journalist territory.
A little better.
I know, I was going to say that.
It's a little better.
All right, Gloria Borger, David Gregory, thank you so much to both of you. Coming up, the polar plunge putting millions at risk, a deep freeze so brutal that it's actually colder in parts.